Welcome, fellow Crusaders, and thank you for tuning in into this special episode. I'm Beastie Boy,
And I'm Red.
and today we have a special guest, Ryan Haäck, to discuss his latest project, Bric-A-Brac.
Yep. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
It's
we're
our
glad
pleasure.
we could do this. So, before we start anything, could you give the audience a quick description of what Bric-A-Brac is?
For sure. Put it simply, kind of like the elevator pitch, is kind of Star Wars and Rudolph together. It's like that mix of the fantasy elements and the whimsical nature of Rudolph with obviously all the famous Christmas characters, and then adding a intergalactic conflict and fun characters that Star Wars has. And just those two elements together, I think, really explain what it is. But it's basically about a war on a Christmas planet, basically. And this Christmas planet has been taken over by these nutcrackers who suddenly have kind of decided that they want to take over. And so we follow a young 10-year-old boy who's trying to find Father Christmas because he believes that Father Christmas can save the world and save everything. But what he doesn't know is that, there's some complications to that. And yeah, it's really just about Christmas, what Christmas means to people. And it has a lot of messages from all Christmas movies, whether it be Christmas Carol, we have a Scrooge kind of character who's redemptive, or we have just a mashing of a lot of different Christmas ideas. That's what the whole story is, really.
That's actually really unique. And so you have references, like you said, Star Wars was also mentioned in there too. Like some of the characters or the groupings will be the Rebellion, or one of your main characters, like General Almond, is closely referenced to Darth Vader.
Sort of, yeah. So actually, similarly, because he is sort of like how Darth Vader is in this issue, in the second issue, we'll reveal that actually he is sort of like a sub-villain because he's being manipulated to do what he's doing, sort of like how Darth Vader is being manipulated sort of to do the Emperor's bidding. So I didn't really see that comparison until right now, but it's true that it is like Star Wars a little bit in that way too.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You mentioned you're on issue 2. How many issues did you have in mind?
3. There's going to be 3. It will be a 3-issue series as it stands, and it's going to be a 1-arc story as it stands. I mean, it's possible there could be more, but as it stands, just one whole story.
Is there any influence you've taken from the previous projects, like what I've seen from Serial Wars, Dispose, or your number one Free, to help you create this story as well?
Oh, okay. So those are from a while ago. Those stories, yeah, those were kind of some of my first comic book, dipping my feet into the comic book pool. So those were kind of early collaborations I did in 2018. But ironically enough, Serial Wars, that comic that you mentioned, actually is a comic book that I collaborated with Tom Barton, who is collaborating with me on this comic book. He's doing the entire backup story, The Tragedy of Jack Frost, and he's done all the covers. So Tom has a huge hand in this book. So that collaboration is definitely still around, and the letterer of those early comics is lettering this book. So those, I think, the influences with those early works is the collaborations that I've continued to hold. And I did successfully crowdfund a book before Bric-A-Brac. It is basically a suspense and horror story anthology called The Unspeakable Text. It's a webcomic that I have, and we have about 22 stories. And what I do is I write all the stories, and then I ask other artists to collaborate with me on them. And that's something that we funded before Bric-A-Brac. So yeah, all these comic book projects really have just helped me collaborate with people more easily. I think the more you do it, the easier it is to make the collaborations work, and the easier it is to feel how an artist would like you to write scripts for them. Because some artists don't like full scripts, and some do. Some like the direction, and some want to be given the opportunity to kind of tell the story in their own way. So yeah, I mean, every comic book project has really taught me and prepared me for this one, I think.
That's pretty unique.
Your stance on opening yourself up to be more creative partners with as many people as possible is such a unique take in sort of the Kickstarter Indiegogo world.
Mm-hmm.
I can say here we appreciate that it's not just okay, you're going to stay in your bubble and this is who you work with and this is our product. No, you're going to write a thing and whoever's is on docket is on docket.
Yeah, that's a really especially with the Unspeakable Text project, the webcomic I have, it's really like an outreach program in some ways, because I kind of just go on ArtStation and Instagram and share scripts with people and ask them if they want to collaborate. And some people have never worked on comic books before who actually end up collaborating with me. Some people haven't for a very long time, and they're kind of just, posting art just for fun. And so it's just a really cool project that I think, and even collaborators have told me that the project has really reinvigorated their interest in comics. So I just think that it's so awesome to find artists out there, because there's so many great ones that are just waiting to maybe get a chance to write comics, but have never really done it, or draw comics rather. So it's just cool. I'll collaborate with anyone, I think it's just such a fun thing to do. And I love that project for that. I think Bric-A-Brac is a little bit more specific, because I think our artist Raphael, he has a very specific vision of how he wants the story to go, and our visions kind of coalesce. Because it is a difficult, it's a cartoony style. And you guys have seen the art, and I'm sure people who click the link, they've seen the art too. And so it's kind of very difficult for someone to get into that, tune into his very specific art, Raphael's very specific art. So, but yeah, it's just so fun to collaborate with people, because you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, and you've obviously, as you mentioned, you've basically opened its lane for other artists to actually have the chance to, per se, take part in creating these comics with you, or just show their creative flair in a sense, right? So that's pretty.
Yeah,
that's pretty
definitely. Cool. Yeah.
We keep saying the title. Where did the title come from?
Yeah, so that title, if you are familiar with, obviously, The Nightmare Before Christmas, there's a song in it called Jack's Lament, and Jack is in his little tower, and he's kind of lamenting about, what is Christmas? Should I like it, or it doesn't make any sense, but there's something about it that's so appealing to me. And Bric-A-Brac, the term, basically just means a bunch of random stuff added together. So that's, first off, I got the term from that Nightmare Before Christmas, which is one of my favorite movies. And then I kind of applied it to this story, because in a sense, what we're doing is just mashing a bunch of random Christmas things together and kind of creating something that is sort of familiar, but not really. Like the characters, for example, Jack Frost is just one of the examples of a character who, there's slivers of maybe what you know about him, maybe from the songs or from the Rankin and Bass stuff, but he's very different. He's a golem. He's a massive monster creature. And then nutcrackers, who are usually the heroes. For example, in the Nutcracker dance, the ballet, they're the heroes, but in this, they're the villains. So it's just kind of flipping those things on its head. But basically the term is, first, it's fun to say. And then second, it's just really, really up deeply about the idea of just mashing those ideas together in kind of a fantasy context. And it's fun. I could have easily called it Santa Claus Adventures or Christmas Adventures, but I think
could have called it Hodgepodge.
Or that as well. But I think that for some reason the term, I don't know, I love it, and it wasn't taken. And I was like, this has to happen.
And it completely fits your story, because not only is your story kind of a super mix of, stick it all in a blender and this is what came out and this is your brilliant idea, but also it's like your collaborative effort too.
Yes. Yeah. I would say so.
You're mixing of your ideas and other people's thought processes and art to boot. Throwing that in itself is also a bric-a-brac.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would say that's totally true for a lot of comic book collaborations. It's, yeah, like I said, you never really know what you're going to get, and especially with me and Raphael, because Raphael is Portuguese. He does not speak English. He speaks very little English, and so it's always kind of a challenge to kind of translate to him what I want. But then he is so smart. He's so in tune to what I want that he almost makes it better every time. Almost every time. Every time. There's not even a time where he doesn't. He just always understands how to make it better. And so, yeah, we've just become a perfect team for this book, I think.
That is amazing that not only are you working through this project, but as of this recording, how funded is your project again?
So we're at 74 just today. So we're almost at 75% and 14 days left.
That is absolutely amazing. When this episode goes live, there will be a couple days left. We encourage everybody to go to the description of this video or to the external links shared on this video on your podcasting service of choice, and click the link and read through. And if you enjoy this comic and this series, to continue to fund this comic and this series and Ryan here. Beastie, I believe you had something.
Yeah, so you were saying like even with the creative team that you have, like it's obviously like not like difficult, but it's an interesting task to do so. So like how exactly with your other artists, like how do you translate your imagination of like what you want to bring to the comic and how to bring it to life with the creative team and work together to make that happen?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the main things I feel like I write kind of clearer scripts that kind of just give direction. I think of scripts as like an invitation to collaborate, because a script alone really doesn't do much, like especially in comic books. I mean, a script in Hollywood can sell for a sum of money, but a script in comics, it's kind of just, it doesn't really stand alone. So I'm writing something that demands collaboration. And so basically it's just, the process just goes, I will think of maybe what I want on a page and have kind of an idea of how many pages I want. And for this particular issue, we have 25, and kind of just tell the story within those parameters. And I just give direction. And usually with comic books, and you guys know probably comic book language, I don't want to have like scenes between different pages. I kind of want it very, I think orderly and structured. Yeah, just to have it very orderly and structured, especially because we're trying to go for a story book feel. And so that also demands kind of all the scenes kind of happen in one, in a couple pages, and there's no like scenes that split to other scenes like in other comic books, whereas like in a Marvel book you have, maybe one panel's in New York City, then one's in Tokyo, or, it's just to show the scale of something. I think in this book, it's just, we try to kind of go for that kind of language, but that's kind of just technical stuff. But the collaboration, very simply, is just me kind of telling, them exactly what I kind of want for this, and they kind of reimagine it in this way and think maybe I could do this easier in this way. Maybe we could, we could figure out a way where we could have this action happen in the previous panel instead of making a whole other panel, and then you could save you some space. It's about the compromise too, and kind of trying to make the best story possible. Luckily, I'm really with artists who really understand how to tell a good narrative story, because it's hard for me to translate that and visualize it and see it all. I have a vision of what I want, but truly the artist is the real director. So, that's just kind of a breakdown of what scripting comic books is. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but at the end of the day, it's just what I do is kind of invite the collaboration and kind of set what's going to happen. And I have a dialogue and that kind of stuff, and captions and stuff. And I do the lettering, but yeah, that's kind of my process.
Very much an unsung job in the lettering department.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Letterers, you don't realize how important lettering is. It's so important, especially if it's inconsistent, or if it's, just to give you an example, people really love Alan Moore's Miracle Man, but the issue with it, right. But the issue with it is that people always say the lettering sucks. And so like they'd say that that's the one thing preventing it from being perfect is the lettering in those early Miracle. Yeah. In those early Miracle Man. And so it just goes to show you that lettering is crucial. It can totally make or break a book, which you wouldn't think so. Like you'd like, oh, it's just the words. Like you could, but it really does the whole presentation. It has to be, it just has to look appealing. And a bad lettering, especially because lettering's covering up the pages and covering up the artistry, it has to look good. It has to look good.
There was a recent issue of X-Men that got put out in the last handful of months that the dialogue bubble actually was pointing to the wrong person.
Oh, wow.
And how that got all the way to printing is hilarious. I own that issue strictly for that little bit of an error.
Right. I'm sure they probably fixed it in the second printing or something, or I'm not sure.
In
but
the trade,
even in the old
fixed.
Days.
Yeah, in the trade, I believe fixed. But they didn't, in its second printing, it didn't actually get one.
Right.
So
wow.
It just forever is stuck like that.
Yeah, I think lettering is so important, and even back in the day, they had to do it with their hands, or they had to. It's just so cool, and I luckily my letterist, they've created their own. A lot of really good letterers just create their own fonts and stuff, which is so cool. Or I've even heard of people paying people to create their own fonts that they only use in their books. Like there's a creator that I know who basically paid someone like $4,000 to create this. Yeah, but to create a lot of letters and stuff that they've used in their comics for about 20 years. So, wow. I think that just goes to show you how, like, lettering, it gives you a voice, too. Like, It's weird how it gives you a specific, like, people recognize your book if it has the same kind of lettering. Just like every Marvel book has the same kind of lettering, or every DC book. It's just like, it's really
standard.
important. It's a weird thing.
So I've also noticed or read that you've been inspired by the New 52 comic run. So have you taken any elements or character concepts from that universe to help create the story specifically?
The New 52, yeah. Well, let's see here. Yeah, my earliest comic experience was the New 52 stuff. And I would say that I think the biggest inspiration from some of my first comics, I think, is like some of the writers that I really liked. Scott Snyder being one of them. I think that people kind of debate his skill level now. I think he's still great, but I think that maybe he tries, he's kind of become a little bit predictable. But I think that early on in his Batman stuff, he was really good with Death of the Family and Endgame, and I enjoyed those a lot. And so he was kind of like my first person where I was like, I want to do this in some capacity. Like, I want to write comics. I love this. His voice for Batman was just so awesome. And then, Grant Morrison, I think he had a run in the New 52 with Superman. I think it was called All-Star Superman, but it wasn't a continuation of his thing with Frank Quitely. It was different. It was still cool though. And yeah, there was a lot of great books in the New 52, but I would say those two writers out of that reboot, really, I still follow to this day. And I think they really inspired me to, first off, write whatever you want, don't, especially with Grant Morrison, he kind of just writes whatever he wants. He doesn't care if some people will think it's weird. I mean, obviously Final Crisis, people were they were angry about it because a lot of people didn't quite understand what was going on. And I don't really understand what's going on even to this day. I don't think a lot of people but Grant Morrison do with Final Crisis. But at the same time, he had the balls and he really had the wherewithal to make it anyway. And so I just think that kind of ability is still inspiring to me. I think he's just a genius.
So we've mentioned a lot in this show on like modern comics and like that comic book industry. How has working with crowdfunding changed how you view that industry and that medium now?
That's interesting. I mean, I have respect for the comic book industry. I love a lot of the creators, and I think that it just makes me, doing crowdfunding just makes me see that I think in the next few years we're going to see a lot more of DC, not just their creators, because they've already kind of done that. Sean Gordon Murphy with his big book, he came on and with
the White Knight series, yeah.
Right. And but he came on Indiegogo with a book, but Sean has worked with DC a lot. And Jimmy Palmiotti has been crowdfunding a lot. So not only am I seeing a lot of people who work in comic books and have for many years, like Jimmy Palmiotti's, worked in comics since the 80s. He's legend. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Carl Kessel, who worked with Superboy, has a very successful, those are just a few. I mean, and Scott Snyder, obviously this summer had, what was it called? He had to change the name. Nocturna. Yeah. And, there's so many names of people who have been coming over. And I think that's going to continue happening. But what I also think is going to continue happening, we've already seen DC, well, first off, have laying off a lot of their editorial. But secondly, cutting a lot of their ties with Diamond and distribution. So I think that really what I see is that DC and Marvel will be crowdfunding their own books, just like Dynamite does, and just like Boom Studios has done with a Berserker. I think that that's going to happen, where we'll have kind of like in Italy and in Europe, where they have just every 6 months they'll have a comic book or a graphic novel, basically, of maybe 100 pages or 120 pages that is complete, and you get it every 6 months, and you can get it on Indiegogo or Kickstarter. I think that's what's going to happen. I really do. I love the comic book stores, though. I hope they last forever.
Yeah,
but
let's not get this twisted. We love our local comic book stores and the service they provide. It's just where you and myself included, and I'm sure Beastie is in agreement on this, that the industry is changing.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, it is. And I love comic book stores. I mean, I 5 years ago, when I was still in high school, I volunteered my time to a comic book store for 2 years just so I could see what it was like. I loved every minute of it. But I also saw this kind of stuff happening too. I was like, I just think that I don't doubt that there will be comics sold at comic book stores. I think that's going to happen for a long time. But I think that DC will maybe do that too, go into crowdfunding and there's a lot of benefits for that. They can have Jorge Jimenez, arguably one of the best artists in comic books right now, finish 120 pages, and that'll be his year's work, and they don't have to rely on other artists to do Batman because, they want Jorge Jimenez to do it. And the same with Detective Comics or with a Wonder Woman and stuff like that. I just think that they won't have to have these tight deadlines anymore. It honestly would help DC a lot, in some respects. So I'm not sure how it's going to go, but I will always be a supporter of DC Comics and Marvel Comics. I think that, they're really the bloodline of the indie comics movement to begin with.
If they go, I don't see Indiegogo and Kickstarter comics succeeding any further than they already have.
You're totally right. Yeah.
If they dropped off the face of the earth for some random reason, just comic books stop, next year, January 3rd, comics stopped happening. I think the Indiegogo and the Kickstarter scene tries to maybe boost itself up.
Right.
In their ashes to sort of try to come out as a phoenix, but not quite make it because you need that big name. You need a detective comic behind it. People understand what a detective comics means and what you're getting from that.
Yeah, it's huge. And I remember there was a documentary that Jeff Johns, he has a lot of interesting ideas about this too. But he was saying, I think it was like a DC documentary or something. And he was saying that, if these comic books stop being made, the characters will fossilize. And just like Flash Gordon has fossilized, or just like how, we look at Flash Gordon or the Rocketeer, or even what's the character, cowboy character. I'm trying to think of his name. But, there's so
Jonah
many
Hex.
that are, no. Jonah Hex is still in the DC continuity. I mean, like a cowboy character from old serials in the 50s and stuff. You know what I mean? The Lone Ranger, And so we only look at the Lone Ranger as kind of like a novelty. Whereas we look at Batman as he's alive and he's in movies all the time. It's like the Lone Ranger he's a novelty. And he's kind of fossilized in this forever 50s era, which is fine. But it's just that I think his point was that if we stop making comic books,
they become of a time and then they stop there.
Exactly. And then that has ramifications in the movies and cartoons and toys. And it doesn't stop there, because people will find something else to like. And I know that a lot of people love video game or, comic books now. But again, if the characters fossilize in the comic books and they stop producing them, then the other stuff will stop too, because they have no IPs left. They have no...
You mentioned movies and toys and that sort of a bigger industry there. I welcome Beastie to jump in on this when he feels like it. Do you see your characters jumping to the big screen or jumping in children's hands in that way?
Well, I definitely hope they jump in children's hands, because unlike one of the great things about the comic book store, just to kind of segue, to connect the two things, is that a kid can go in and see a book he likes and then pick it up, like a 10-year-old kid or a 9-year-old kid. But obviously when you're crowdfunding, I don't think kids are actively looking at crowdfunding sites. I just don't see that happening. And then putting down their mom's credit card information and backing the book, it's just not going to happen. My goal is to have kids experience this in any way possible. So because that's the whole point of the book. It's an all ages book, but my goal is to have kids experience it, whether it be with toys or a series, which would be amazing, or just to honestly have it in a collected trade that, a kid can pick up at Barnes & Noble or something. That is my dream, because I loved when my mother read me Christmas stories before going to bed on Christmas Eve. That's what I remember when I read the story to myself. And I hope that kids do the same. Because I think the story is just, it's probably more entertaining than The Night Before Christmas. To me, it is. So I just think that it would be so cool if it became a tradition in households in any way, with toys, with the story itself, with anything, that original poem. Yeah. That's all I'm trying to do, because I know it's a tradition that people read that before bed, but what if they want to read Bric-A-Brac instead? It's you can see Jack Frost beating the crap out of other nutcrackers. Who wouldn't want that in their Christmas Eve story before bedtime?
Yeah, of course, have some little action before,
Exactly.
Right.
Is there any other projects you have lined up for yourself after this potential Christmas story?
So after this, I'm going to be launching a second volume of our Unspeakable Text, which we have about 15 stories for that all lined up. And then we'll be launching that's basically my main project. And then finishing Bric-A-Brac and during Christmas time next year. And maybe between that, we might do something. I do a lot of different things. I don't just do comic books. I have my own podcast. I have prose that I write, and I write novels, and then I do films too. So I always have different projects going on. But in terms of comic books, I think just next year we'll just have 2, but it's possible we could have more than that. But I do want to get Bric-A-Brac done before I really start any huge new venture. Because I think that's just, I don't really want to kind of maybe, I don't know. I just think I want to focus on it, especially for myself, because I know Raphael is just such a great artist, and I just want to finish this one out first.
For sure. Red, do you have any other questions?
I just want to pick his brain about his podcast now, since he's on ours. Why don't you take a minute and shill yourself there, my friend?
Oh yeah, so the podcast. Yeah, so I do actually interview a lot of writers, and sometimes occasionally read my own stories, and that's it's called the Farfetch podcast, a Farfetch storytelling podcast. And I'm sure if you look me up on my Instagram at RyanHawk_98, you'll find the link. And yeah, it's just me talking to creators. So actually yesterday I talked to a Kickstarter creator named Curtis Clow. If you're familiar with Beastlands or The Wild Cosmos or Slightly Exaggerated, any of those comic books on Kickstarter, he launched those and he succeeded them. And he's kind of like me, he's a writer. So I kind of picked his brain about how he made the move to independent. So he's now, actually living off of money from Kickstarter, and he's actually, an independent comic book writer. That's his job now. He quit his old job, and it's just really inspiring to have people like that on the podcast. Yeah, it is. So that's kind of the whole goal, is to inspire writers, because writing is a lonely profession. So the podcast is forming into this kind of inspiring writers, talking about the craft and talking about how you can make a living at it. That's kind of my goal for the podcast. We're not there yet. We're in the very early stages.
You have your roots planted in so many things. You are calling yourself an ecosystem the more you go on.
Yes.
So for some final stuff, or if anything we can add on to this, but where can people find you and also support your work?
Yeah, so again, this Bric-A-Brac #2 is on Indiegogo. We are on Indiegogo, but you can follow me at Ryan Haäck, Ryan HAACK _98 on Instagram. That's basically the best place you can follow me, and I'll post all different kinds of stuff. I'm on Twitter occasionally, but I don't really like it that much. But Instagram is kind of the best, because you can get to my link tree and all that kind of stuff, and you'll find the campaign. And yeah, that's kind of where I am primarily.
Now that we've mentioned both platforms, both Kickstarter and Indiegogo, what draws you to Indiegogo as opposed to Kickstarter?
I think Kickstarter is adding new tools. Like they are going to add some new tools, like the add-on feature where you can add something onto a perk that you've pledged for, which is great, which is something from Indiegogo. But I just think that Indiegogo gives you more tools. And it seems like they kind of want you to succeed more, because they allow you to extend your period of funding, which is awesome, especially for someone like me who is still gaining an audience and not quite there yet. And, I could use all the time I can have to continue to fund my campaign. And they also allow you to do this awesome thing called in demand. So you can complete the campaign and people can still back the book after you have. Where Kickstarter, it's kind of like a one and done thing. You can't come back. But Kickstarter has a bigger audience. So I will always use both. It's just kind of a matter of, I've failed this campaign several times. So I've used Kickstarter, I've used Indiegogo, and failed on both of them. So I've kind of seen that, honestly, it's the same thing on both of them. It doesn't really matter. You really have to be your own promoter. You have to be, if you want to succeed a campaign, you have to always be sharing and trying to get people interested in the work. It doesn't matter what platform it is, because that platform is not going to find your audience for you. You have to do it kind of on your own.
And that's where we come in.
Yes, exactly. And thank you for having me again. It's just awesome that you guys are so interested in the book and so enthusiastic about me as a creator. That's awesome.
Our show is very much a all-inclusive. So I personally have talked about many creator-owned projects on Kickstarter. Scott Snyder's we featured on our weekly news show, the Itty Bitty Nerdy Committee.
He's been on it?
No, we have talked about his project.
Okay.
If we listen, Scott, if you're listening, Mr. Snyder, we would love to have you on any day of the week. You tell us the time and place, and we'll be there.
I saw him once, but no, I've never. Yeah, I saw him once at it was actually really cool, because it was when they announced that James Tynion was going to be the writer of Batman. It was at this Barnes and Noble at Union Square in New York City, where I live, and yeah, James Tynion was there. I think Jim Lee was there. Or no, Dan DiDio was there. Scott Snyder was there. And then another Batman writer was there. I forget his name. I think Jock was there. So it was really cool. But anyway.
All of those are super dope people. And we would like to have them on our show if they, knew we existed.
They will one day. They will.
That I appreciate the optimism. Don't get me wrong.
And he's been on smaller shows too. I mean, he always goes on stuff. I'm sure you could get him on. There's no problem. He's such a nice guy.
Shoot, maybe you just gotta shoot him a message then.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
Watch us
probably.
shoot our shot and land amongst the stars anyway.
Yeah. Any follow-up questions, Red? Or
yeah, you say that you've failed this project, but also you said that you had issue 1 successful. What lessons did you learn from issue 1 to issue 2?
Yes. So let's see. There's so many things about crowdfunding that are very difficult, but I think the number one thing is to make an email list, and people who back your book, I think you need to, they give you their email, and, you should put that into an email list. I think that's number one if you're trying to be a creator on these kind of platforms. And and never be afraid to share your book. I mean, even if you think that you might be saying it too much, just keep doing it, because you never know who's listening. That's another thing that I learned too. So first one would be make an email list. Second one is you never know who's listening. You never know who's watching. I was on Facebook, just, putting and advertising all my campaigns. And after like the second or third campaign, finally people started to notice and like the stuff. And these are friends from high school, or, friends from even earlier than that, middle school, started to notice that I'm doing all this stuff now. And, then they'll contribute to the book and be like, how can I help? How can I help? You never know who's watching. You never know who's watching. And if you just have to always post, and just don't be afraid to talk about it. I used to be afraid because, it's kind of like, can you back my book? Can you buy my thing? Can you buy my thing? But you should do it with pride, because, you're trying to make something happen. And, it's a really cool thing. You should never be afraid of that. So I think those are my 2 tips, at least what I've learned in the last year.
What happens when you fail the project? Not to talk about your failures, but
oh no, I love talking about failure.
They are excellent places to learn.
Exactly.
When a book doesn't succeed in its goal, what happens?
Yes. So quite simply, all of the money just goes back to the people who backed it. On Indiegogo, the money is taken out of your a card when you put your pledge through. On Kickstarter, however, no money is taken out unless the goal is reached. But in either instance, the money will be given back. But yeah, that's kind of basically what happens. And that's really it. You get to keep all the contacts. You get to keep all the people who back the book and try to support you. You get to keep all the analytics. So you get to see what worked, what didn't. And that's really it. And then you just keep moving on. And you can still post updates on the pages too. Yeah.
That is super insightful. With this being a 3-arc story, is there hypothetical plans to run a campaign to put it all together?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I would love to maybe put it in. I would love to see it in leatherbound, but I'll probably a paperback first. But yeah, there's definitely going to be a campaign initiative to get it. Hopefully next year, get it all in one thing. I think what I'll do is maybe I'll have the number 3 on Indiegogo. Hopefully we'll fund, and then we'll have that around October and fund that. And then in December or maybe November, we'll have a Kickstarter campaign where I'll fund maybe a leatherbound collection. So you can kind of do like the whole, kind of do both of the things at once, or, that's another cool thing is you can kind of try different things on different platforms. So I would never just use one platform.
Right. That's like shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, because you just want to go where the money is, and that's really it. Yeah, I mean, just go where you think you could find the audience. Yeah, I think that you should use both, definitely.
When you are at a time where you're running those multiple campaigns in the next year or so, we would love to have you back. Maybe we'll switch up our co-hosts and you'll get the other 2.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That might be interesting, just to give our audience like a different take on the aspects.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm sure I'll learn a lot of things in the next year as well, especially with fulfilling and all the different things. And I'm sure you guys will learn stuff too, because, when did you guys started the podcast about 6 months ago, or how long ago?
April-ish.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I was seeing that. So I'm sure you guys will learn a lot too.
We have learned a lot, strictly from doing our live show and actually posting consistently, and where to post, and different hosting platforms that way. Boy, have we learned a lot in a very short amount of time.
Right.
But if that's all from you, Beastie.
Yep, that's all for me. That's all for you?
That's all from me.
All right. Well, I guess I'm... Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Ryan, there, our new friend. Is there any extra you'd like to end on?
Not really, other than just, again, thanks for having me. And if you like Christmas stories, this is definitely something you might be interested in. Just putting it out there. I think you know, just check out the art. And if you're inspired by a lot of the, you know, classic, really fun, all ages storytelling, you will like this book, I think.
Excellent. And so as we do on our show, we ask Beastie nicely if he will end our show. Ryan, would you like to do the honors?
Beastly, will you end the show?
For sure. That brings us to the end of this special issue, which our Twitter is at Crusade Nerd, our Instagram is at Nerd Crusade, and we upload every Wednesday to YouTube, and you can download any previous episodes or listen on your mobile device through the anchor.fm website or wherever podcasts are found by searching Nerd Crusade.
And with that, to be continued.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like this video, go ahead and button mash a thumbs up. If you want to swing by when we have a new video, web up the sub button. Oh, and while you're at it, hit the bell to be notified by